welcome to T-POW, not the 80s pop band China in Your Hand. It's T-POW, the psychology of whatever. Each week we enter into the world of a great comedy sketch, a pop song, piece of artwork, and explore its psychological themes, how it influences our minds, emotions, happiness, and work through our day-to-day lives. I'm Jeff Downs. I'm a comedy writer and podcaster, and we've got John Woods. Say hello, John.
Hi, I'm John Woods. I'm a psychologist. I'm very interested in the world of entertainment and the psychological theories and processes that might be involved in it.
Brilliant. And
I'm Tony Kinsella, full-time teacher, part-time stand-up comedian and performance poet and frustrated artist who envies people who've got a talent for creating artistic work.
Brilliant. Welcome, everybody. So this episode, we're going to be looking at Banksy, who is an icon in himself, a street artist. I think we're all graffiti artists. I think we'll all go with that term. And obviously, this being an audio format, we're going to look at, say, 3 pictures, or 2 mainly, but I think everybody now in their minds can picture a Banksy, classic Banksy picture. John, what's that for you? Anything that springs to mind, a classic Banksy for you?
The girl with the balloon.
Girl with the balloon. Tony?
It's the classic Banksy.
Probably the girl with the balloon, but there's also the one where the lady's sweeping the street and she's pulling up the wall and sweeping the rubbish under the wall. I don't know if you know that one as well.
Yeah, that's it. I like, there's a great one he did of 2 lovers embracing, but they were looking at their mobile phones instead of each other. And I think that's kind of seminal. So I think what we'll do, we'll just set it up perhaps how we were all aware of Banksy and how he came into our lives, because we're going to look at 2 of the pictures. So just to say to people, if they want to get on their phones or Google it, we're going to look at the girl with the red heart balloon and the anarchist throwing a bunch of flowers. But we're going to look. We can chat about all of Banksy's art. For me, I was working in Old Street in London around 2002, 2003, and on lunchtimes I'd go off with other friends, and someone pointed to a picture of a rat on a building, just very small. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, that's Banksy." And I said, "Who's Banksy?" And I didn't have a clue, and that was one of the very first Banksy wall lights piece of wall art I'd seen. If I'd known now, I would have been walking around with a lump hammer and chisel, getting ready to knock any piece of masonry off and steal it away. But of course, no one had a clue. So, Tony, what about you? How did he come into your life?
I think it probably was the girl with the balloon that I first saw. I couldn't really pinpoint when it was, but I do remember finding it quite magical. And even as somebody who tours around Europe doing a lot of city breaks and photographing as much urban art as I can find, this was particularly striking. There was something about it that I thought, wow, that's quite magical.
It is. It's quite. John, what about you? How did you sort of first be aware of Banksy's art?
I would say I'd use the word osmosis. I don't think I'm a very visual person that takes notice of the visual world or any particular episodes that are very striking in it. And it's almost as if Banksy was part of my peripheral vision so much that it became almost habitual to recognise that it was there. So the striking images were the girl with the balloon, and I think the police embracing. Those were the 2 the images that impacted themselves. I didn't kind of ever recall seeing them and going, wow, that's a great piece of art. They just became there and crept up on me somehow, which maybe is another kind of facet of great art, is that it's a gradual revolution rather than a sudden hit. It actually builds up very gently. So I think that's my recollections of Banksy's influence.
So we know that he's from Bristol originally, and nobody's quite sure of his name. He's very guarded. He gives very little or no interviews. He's never really been pictured, but we do know he's from Bristol, probably ex-public school boy. We're not sure. He started, it seems, doing a lot of artwork in London, around there. That's definitely where I'd sort of seen it, and I think he was obviously doing it around Bristol. He then, through, I don't know, just his graffiti being out there. And then he started to sort of up his game, didn't he? Where the graffiti was sort of popping up, and then he was getting quite political with it. And I think that's probably when he sort of became to media attention, wasn't he? Because he's done graffiti on the West Bank, on the wall out there, and he then went global, international. He's done stuff at Disneyland Paris. When Guantanamo was in the news, he put a dummy and a figure. He managed to get into the theme park, and they set up. It's amazing how he plans these things. So he did that at Disneyland Paris. That got him notoriety.
They actually closed the park because it was a security risk and sent everybody out of Disneyland for a couple of hours.
Okay. So, and then slowly but surely, there was that other thing he did as well, wasn't there? He was in New York, and he got someone to sell, and it was in like I think it was Central Park, and it was alongside other sellers selling I Love New York T-shirts and general merchandise, and someone had set up, and it was his original artwork, and he was selling it for like $25-$30, and they just had some old man or whoever just not to tip off people. And I think all day that guy was there was like hundreds and thousands of pounds worth of Banksy art, all for about $50, and I think 3 people bought original pieces because they just thought it was all copies. He's very, very clever how he constantly subverts genres and I suppose twists stuff. And I think as well, if we're talking very recently the up for auction, was it the girl with the balloon? I can't remember which. Let me have to
I think
Google.
it was, yeah.
But do you remember that, John? Now there's a cycle, because it started to shred, didn't it? For people that probably haven't seen it, Google it. It was at a Sotheby's, and he'd attached a paper shredder inside, and obviously remote control. When the piece was sold for, I don't know, X millions, put a close aid to Banksy, pressed a button, and the picture started to shred.
That's right.
Like in the auction room that someone just paid $1 million whatever for, and it was the reaction of the crowd and sort of. So, what do you think about that, John?
Well, each of them is almost the whole art experience. It becomes a performance art piece within the frameworks of society that kind of determine how art is processed.
Yeah.
Almost like a factory, and it's exposing the kind of falsity of that in a way, and it's kind of contrivance. It's my view. I did do a bit of research, and the person who bought the shredded one, have put it back together and glued it back together and have it on display. And part of its appeal is that it is shredded.
Yes.
It's almost that factor, instead of being destructive, is now part of the constructive nature of that piece.
Yes.
People like a show. People like different ideas.
What about the psychology? So with a great piece of art, it's obviously stirring something inside us, and we connect on obviously a visual level, but an emotional level. So is there, from a psychologist's point of view, what can you say about a good piece of art and how it affects us?
Generally, or in terms of Banksy.
Well, but look, Banksy, and then perhaps, like, say, the Mona Lisa, Van Gogh, or Rembrandt, or who painted the Mona Lisa? Which
Leonardo da Vinci.
Da Vinci, that's it. So obviously, art's not my strong point, but those famous, they're iconic, aren't they? Yeah. Why is Banksy, do you think, so iconic, John? And then perhaps other great artists.
I mean, I can only guess, and what someone in the 21st century regards as iconic might be different to what it would be in the 14th century.
Yeah, good point.
I think Banksy, what Banksy does, in my view, which you're asking questions in terms of what is he going to do next?
Yeah.
What is he trying to say about society or the way we live? That's what it seems to me. That's what I bring to it. And that's the fascination. You're looking for the subtexts all the time. Whether people, and I would love to ask the people who are art historians or art appreciators how they would articulate it, I'm not sure. But it does seem that it is, what is he trying to say?
Yeah.
Now, whether in the 14th century, when there were religious painters or whatever, I can't remember what period of art that was, whether the audience, a lot of them were religious at the time because the churches funded artists. It was the only way you could get funded to produce art, really. Yeah. Whether you were in comedy, music, or visual arts, a lot of it was religious because that was the way that. Because that's where the money was, and whether people looking at that art would see, because there is those sort of questions asked, but using themes from the Bible.
Yeah,
there's issues around power relationships between men and women, which is covered through Bible stories, and the artist has actually expressed certain, shall we say, political views through that tableau. And maybe Banksy's doing the same thing. Through familiar tableaus, a girl holding a balloon, there's subtext. If that's a nice, accessible image, isn't that a nice thing to paint on a wall? But when you look deeper into it, there's messages coming through. Two policemen kissing.
Yes.
So on.
Yes.
The guy throwing the flowers.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Tony.
Yeah, just in response to that, I think one of the interesting things you said there is how you kind of think about what these paintings mean. And Jeff mentioned the Mona Lisa, and apparently if you Google the word inscrutable, the Mona Lisa is the first thing that comes up, and people are curious about what that expression is on her face. Apparently she's got what look more like a man's hands than a woman's, and some people think it was actually Da Vinci. And if you think of other paintings like The Scream by Edvard Munch, who is this figure on the bridge? Who are the two men standing behind him? Why is the sky so kind of on fire? And I think I could look at a beautiful Constable landscape and think, oh, that's quite nice, and then move on to the next picture. But I think Banksy does what Leonardo does on the Mona Lisa and what Edvard Munch does on The Scream. He starts provoking thoughts about what it means and what's the story behind it. And I think maybe the more iconic art actually does that. It actually gets you thinking about what exactly does it mean. It doesn't give its gifts too easily. It makes you kind of think a little bit first.
In psychological terms, or one branch of psychological terms, which it resonates with me with my training and so on. It almost asks Socratean questions.
Ooh.
Why? Why are you thinking that?
Okay.
This is my understanding of a Socratean approach.
What's behind that? Sorry, and for Socrates, for people that don't know, and I have very scant knowledge, so he was a Greek philosopher, is that right?
Yeah.
And what was his particular sort of philosophy as opposed to anybody around that time, if you can explain?
Well, I've not studied Socrates in depth, but my understanding is he always asked questions. So when people went to him for answers as a philosopher, he never gave people answers. He encouraged people to come up with the answers themselves.
So he was always asking questions. Could we say that he was probably the very first world's chat show host? Is that fair? Yeah, I'm blowing it open. But
who knows? Who knows?
But so, as humans, we are always wanting answers. Is that part of us? But what he's trying to say is, you've got to start thinking for yourselves. You've got to start asking the questions. Is that about right?
Yeah. And if you translate that into a modern approach to counselling, one of the underlying philosophies of it is that people have the resources and the understanding to develop their own solutions to problems.
Okay.
And that the counsellor just needs to support the person to come up with their own solutions and methods and approaches which will resolve difficulties. Yeah. And in a way, you could say, maybe Banksy's offering that. He's holding up something to encourage people to think about things and ways and practices of society which are assumed are immutable, that the way things are. And he's saying, perhaps within us, we have got the potential to think creatively about different ways of behaving towards each other. Or we might contemplate changing customs and social conventions because they're not set in stone. And maybe that's what might be one aspect of what great art will do, is say, look, there are other ways of doing things beyond what is accepted as the norm. And if you think about the changes in society, there are certain changes where it was absolutely 40, 50 years ago, there wouldn't even be a question asked about certain things. But now, if these are not accepted, that they have to be certain parts of behaviour or certain laws or certain things. That's the way the natural world is.
Yeah. And that's...
Sorry,
just say that's really interesting about... Because I think a lot of people, when they go to see a counsellor, expect them to have the answers for you. And of course, the first thing a counsellor will do is will turn it around and ask them the questions. So I never knew that, and I didn't know that's probably
an approach.
It came from a Socratean standpoint. That's fascinating. And
if listeners want to look into that, it's called... There's two areas of it, which I'll not go into now, but there's solution-focused brief therapy. It's the one approach. And the other one's solution-oriented therapy, where we encourage people to identify their own solutions rather than giving them the answer.
And partly that's saying, so is that sort of saying about our subconscious, that within our subconscious, that not the answers are there, but the problems are unknown to us within our subconscious, and through art and reading or whatever, that's the sort of art side, and playing an instrument or writing poetry, you're as you've just said there, where you're answering your own questions, you're dealing with your problem in that type of way, as opposed to, I think, the classic setup of a psychiatrist seems, and everybody knows it from films, is that you lie on a couch, the psychiatrist sits in a chair with a notepad and listens to your problems, and then the psychiatrist will go, well, you need to do this, 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 and this is just not the case.
That's an entertainment cliched version of psychiatry. But just to get a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who prescribes medication for certain mental health conditions. And I mean, people get confused about psychiatry, psychotherapy, and psychologist. What you've just described is what would typically, in a sort of usual way, be defined as psychotherapy.
Right.
Psychiatry would be, I'm going to prescribe this medication to help you with whatever mental health condition you've got. And psychology might use a person-centered approach.
Okay.
Which is very often you'll hear the person-centered approach is one where the person can develop their own solutions.
Sure.
And they use things like unconditional positive regard. So they are the centre of it. I don't go to them and go, you know what you need to do? You need to sort this and this out. That's not the way the person's encouraged to prioritise and take steps.
Okay. If we just bring that round to the first picture that we're going to look at, and with other episodes, I'll play a clip or play some music. And in this case, I want everybody now just to either Google it or just in your mind's eye. So we'll look at the anarchist throwing the bunch of flowers, which is probably one of his big classic pictures and statements. So clearly it's a picture that he's taken from the news or wherever, a typical anarchist throwing a petrol bomb, and he's replaced the petrol bomb with a bunch of flowers. Obviously, it's, as you say, it's John about asking questions, and he's immediately, with this statement, I think, saying about peace and love and not war and aggression. So would you say it's a human trait in times of fear or protests? We tend to attack, don't we? We tend to throw things or we get aggressive. So what's he is that quite simply what he's trying to do there? He's putting over another theory.
I looked at it a different way. I looked it up. I had a bit of research on it, and it used the phrase wage peace.
Wage.
Okay.
Say that again. Sorry.
Wage peace. So instead of waging war, wage peace.
I got you. Yeah.
So in a way, it's like a kind of the philosophy of Gandhi. It's using the metaphor of the figure is an attack figure, an aggressive figure, but the emblem is the flower. It's almost like give power to the flower. This is the way I'm reading it, and if we looked at the psychology of this, rather than being therapeutic, I feel in the way that we've just discussed, and this Socratean and asking the questions, the flower could be. Flowers are a symbol of love, or loss.
Yeah.
And I thought that and this is just me putting the pieces together. The love in psychology terms is covered in theory about an area called positive psychology, which is love is one of the signature strengths of people.
Right,
it's a strength people can have, and and the researcher Marty Seligman, who's done it, they did a lot of research about all world societies, and they came out with 24 what they call signature strengths, which are the attributes that are valued highly in societies across the world, and one of them is love.
Okay.
I could be reading too much into it, but what he's saying is we're preoccupied with conflict, when in actual fact we should be combating things with love.
Yeah.
And that's the subtext to this painting. I'm happy for people to argue the contrary, but that seems to be a way that I can articulate what he's trying to convey with that picture.
Well, it's quite literally flower power, isn't it? Which is the
flower power.
So, Tony, go on. So
a couple of things. One of the things that struck me about this one, and also the girl with the balloon, is that mix of black and white and colour. And it made me think of certain film, Schindler's List, with the girl in the red coat walking down the street and everything else is black and white. There's a very underrated film called Pleasantville, where it's a black and white TV programme where everybody's behaving like, really kind of old-fashioned Christian values. And then as people start to become sexualised and start to become independent, then girls' lips suddenly go red and they suddenly get rosy cheeks and the clothes suddenly change colour. So that kind of juxtaposition where the bit that represents love and romance, as you say, is bright and colourful, but the aggressive character is black and white, and I think that makes it even more striking. The other thing, you made that interesting point that flowers can be either a symbol of love or death, or we use them at funerals as well. You would the one place I can think of where somebody throws a bouquet would be at a wedding, and there's that old-fashioned tradition that whoever catches the bouquet will be the next person to get married. This person's not throwing the bouquet; he's absolutely hurling it. In the same way that you would hurl a Molotov cocktail, not at one particular individual, but at a load of tanks and police officers, so you're throwing it fairly randomly. So it's almost like he's throwing love at the whole world, if you see what I mean. He's not got a particular target in mind. Yeah. He just wants to throw these colourful, beautiful flowers out there. And that, again, contrasts beautifully with he's way ahead of his time with his face mask, by the way. But
he is.
It does kind of contrast, the back to front baseball cap, the stereotype. It looks like he's wearing jeans. He's very much the kind of, as you said, John, violent, aggressive character. And yet he's about to hurl a bunch of beautiful flowers at the world.
And Tony, just to pick up on there where you've just said, you're quite right, with a wedding, the bride throws that bunch of flowers, which is like a peaceful symbol, but it turns into a riot, doesn't it?
Yeah, a good point.
Because suddenly all the bridesmaids go charging after it because they want to then be...
I'm slightly worried about this because I went to my uncle's funeral last week and I caught the wreath.
Ah, right. Okay.
What does that say?
Well, we'll have to. That's another episode where we talk about.
I like that resonance because if you look the girl with the balloon and the flower man.
Yeah, let's bring the girl with the balloon in photos.
The colour.
Yeah. The
colour is about the positive.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The colour is denoting that these are the things that we should cherish, which is why I thought about the positive psychology. Yeah. Because in both, if we go the girl with the balloon represents, and this is if you look at the girl with the balloon with the full panorama, it says there is always hope painted on the wall. And hope is another positive psychology signature strength.
Okay.
So hope is recognised, shall we say, across cultures as a positive human trait.
Okay. And Obama had his book, Audacity of Hope, so the very word he was using So okay,
Yes.
okay. So do you think hope? Of course, Shawshank Redemption, the film uses that. The whole film is built on hope. Is hope do you think is a same emotion as love then? That it's that powerful because it is. Hope is such a short word, but it's so powerful because we hope we get better. We hope we find someone and fall in love. Da di da di da.
I think they've got different definitions in signature strengths because they are in positive psychology terms they're considered different strengths.
And when you just explain that for me as well, signature strengths or that term you've just used there about the different, love and hope and and you've talked about there's various emotions in that list.
Yeah, in signature strengths, there's like I was saying before, there's 24.
Right.
That they've identified, and they've defined them as distinct characteristics.
Okay.
Okay, I can't reel the whole lot off.
No, sure.
But there's one, love and hope belong in the same subcategory, which I think, in my memory serves me right, it's called transcendence. But there's other categories such as I can't remember. Mine's gone blank on the specific names. But you've got things like signature strengths. You've got justice.
Okay. Yeah.
So some people have got a very strong sense of justice.
Which we can almost, just to say, in that photo of the guy flowing the flowers, there's almost justice in that picture as well, wanting justice.
Yeah.
Which I think comes out for me.
You could come to that conclusion. So maybe whether Banksy would agree with us or not, we could say the thing that's provoking interest in these works of art is that there are emblems of the signature strengths of people within it, and people are picking up on those and finding them reassuring and positive.
Yeah.
So if the balloon's hope, although that's mixed because I'm not sure whether she's grappling for hope or whether she's let it go. I can't.
Yes, it's a sort of mixture of. That's a good point. It's like it's because
that's ambiguous.
Well, because children accidentally. That's interesting because children always accidentally let a balloon go, and so that's how do you react to that, Tony? With that particular.
So again, you look at the girl with the balloon. So again, this kind of what is it that's in colour? It's a bright red, almost kind of cliched Valentine heart, which is kind of floating away. And what I like about this, alongside the one with the guy throwing the flowers, the guy throwing the flowers, if he was throwing a petrol bomb and it was a photograph in a newspaper, you would see the context of it. You would see police barricades, you would see other people with Molotovs, you'd see people in the background in tanks or whatever. But it's just a detail from a bigger story. We don't know where that balloon's going, the heart-shaped balloon. We don't know where their flowers are going to end up. And that's one of the things I like about it, the kind of randomness of the location of, where's that heart heading to? It's almost like she's sending the heart out into the world in the same way that the guy with the flowers doesn't seem to be throwing them to anybody in particular, but just seems to be hurling them into some kind of huge void that we can't see because we've only been given a small detail of the picture. So you're left to fill in that great big void yourself. Where's that balloon going to end up? When my kids were at primary school, they used to do a thing where they all let balloons off with an address label on, and then whoever was found the furthest away, they would. Okay. So you never quite knew where that balloon was going to end up, and that was part of the excitement of it.
Okay, and it's.
That's an interesting one. Yeah. The ambiguity, though, we're picking up on that ambiguity again. It's provoking you to fill in the gaps. It's left gaps for you to fill in and saying, over to you. What do you think about this situation? How would you solve this situation? How do you think this may be for human beings in their lived experience to make things better, maybe?
And he's very good, Banksy, at doing that. I like I think in New York again, he had an old truck, like an abattoir truck, taking cattle off, but the truck was full of stuffed toy animals. It was brilliant. It was just immediately make you question. Eating meat, animal welfare. Sorry, Tony, go on.
Just on the girl with the balloon again. It's interesting that John associated it with hope. And Jeff, you were just saying that kids sometimes accidentally let balloons go. If you look really closely at that one, I don't think she's accidentally letting it go. She feels like it's a sort of gesture that she's kind of sending it off into the air.
Right, okay.
It seems like. So I just wonder whether my first reaction would be whether she's lost somebody, a mother or a father, a grandparent, and she's kind of letting that heart go, whether there's a heaven or whatever you believe in.
You've really made me think there.
Yeah.
You've really made me think because you mentioned the Mona Lisa. Her face is a little bit Mona Lisa-like.
All right.
I can't really pick up the emotion in her face.
Yes, very true. And there's, I think,
I kept looking at it and going, what is she thinking? Because I was trying to work out, was she releasing it as a signal of, I hope somebody finds it? Almost you can release balloons like the flowers when you've suffered a loss.
Yeah.
That seems to be fashionable. And I was really trying to work out, was this a positive release of a balloon, or had she lost something? Yeah. And I don't think it seems to me that face gives anything away to us.
What do you think, John, about the fact that it's not a biological heart, but I think it's actually been used on Valentine cards, this one, and people who've been looking for a slightly more radical Valentine. What do you make about the fact that the heart is such a red cliche, as opposed to a heart that looks biologically accurate?
I'm going to ask a question here, whether I've got it right. The heart looks as if it's got a chip out of it. It's been clipped on the pictures that I looked at.
Okay.
So I was wondering whether that heart actually had a slight imperfection.
Yeah.
It's not.
And
sure.
The cliched heart. Let's think about it, and let's think about what that hope and love is. That's what the conclusion I came to on that. He'd used that device, but he'd actually chipped a little bit out of it, and as if they're saying, you know what, or the media version of love or hope or whatever. Yeah. But in actual fact, there's a version we've got to construct ourselves, and there's a bit missing in this one for you to think of.
Well, and also, just there's like a wind as well. Her hair's going in a particular direction.
Yeah.
The dress is going. So there's a whole other thing of it's now we're all not sure because the wind's come along, that's why she's accidentally lost the balloon, or there's loads of aspects to talk about. Anyway,
she wanted to catch the wind.
Yeah. It's great art. It just makes you think and talk about it more. Now because Banksy's very, not only just his art, he's been known for his sort of physical stand-up art that he does, whether it's a phone box. Do you remember the phone box it was brilliant. It was like a beaten up phone box. It had been hit over with a pickaxe, and it was bent in two. He took an actual London, or rather English or UK phone box, the old red telephone boxes, and he had it sort of sawn in two. It looked like it had been beaten up, and there was red paint and so he does these installations. I suppose that's what they're known as. Mm-hmm. Now, Tony's been to one of his big installations, which was only for about, when was it ago? Was it 2-3 years ago?
It's a bit longer than that. I think it was about 5-6 years ago.
And it was a theme park, wasn't he? And it was
Dismaland.
Dismaland. It was a sort of a response, wasn't it, to the Disneyland, obviously, theme parks. So, Tony, just tell us about your experience.
Well, I mean, one thing that's becoming apparent, particularly from the policeman kissing and the guy throwing the flowers, a lot of Banksy's art is about subverting things. And Dismaland was a subversion of Disneyland. They actually called it a bemusement park as opposed to an amusement park. And I think by subverting Disneyland, you're basically subverting society in the sense that we're all supposed to be polite to each other and cheerful, and salespeople are supposed to engage us. And what happens with Dismaland? What happened, because it was only an installation that was up for about 2 months, I think, in Western Supermare. And when you walked through the door, there was armed police officers dressed in uniform and looking very serious, but the guns were made out of cardboard with sellotape hanging off it. As you walked through the door, instead of there was all these people in pink jackets and Mickey Mouse ears, but instead of "hello, have a nice day," they were just being completely miserable and dismissive of you all the time. So, and then on top of that, and you've all been in the fairground and that particular thing where you've got to throw a little fluffy pillow at a load of tin cans, and if you knock the tin cans over, you win a prize like a teddy bear. There's no way in a million years that little lightweight fluffy thing is going to knock those tins over. What you had in Dismaland was that you threw it at an anvil, and it was just, there wasn't even any pretense.
Okay.
But people were paying £1 to throw a little fluffy thing at an anvil, knowing they had absolutely no chance of winning a prize because you were just basically participating in the whole joke then. So, and in terms of the exhibits, there was like a fairy tale castle based on the Cinderella castle at Disneyland. But inside, the pumpkin coach had crashed and Cinderella was lying dead with blood all around her. And then the paparazzi were photographing the dead body on the floor. And it was only, relatively short time after Princess Diana had been killed in the car crash. So it's clearly a comment on that. So it had the feel of a typical... There was a Punch and Judy show that was a feminist Punch and Judy show with lots of swearing in it. There was that thing where you put somebody in and you can direct a boat, float the boat around, and you can direct where it goes.
Remote control
boat, but it was full of boat people. There was like 100 characters in one boat, and there were also figures floating. There were figures floating face down in the water. So he was kind of and it wasn't just Banksy. Banksy was the genius behind it all, but he also gave an opportunity for hundreds of other urban artists from all around the world to kind of do an exhibit. It was £3 to get in. I paid £20 on the black market, but it was one of the great cultural experiences of my life, and £20 was nothing. And he probably there was such a demand for tickets, he could have run it for 5 years and charged people £30, but he just
to say,
go on,
I remember at the time it was the way that it was. He did it was that it was a lottery, wasn't it? You would email on the website, and it was total lottery whether your name came up to get a ticket. That's partly how he was working it. It was incredibly cheap as well, which I think is because I don't know what it is to get into Disneyland, but my lord,
it's not £3.
When I've spoken to families that have gone, it is just eye-watering.
A lot of money.
So that, and it was, and you're right. It was about 4 years ago, and it was only for 2 months. It was literally.
I've got 6 weeks in my head, so it's certainly round about that. Yeah.
Oh, you're right. 6 weeks, and it was only open for 6 weeks, and that was it. And it was so much artwork there.
Everybody wanted to see it. People were frustrated that they couldn't get tickets.
Because I'll do this on SoundCloud, so I'll leave my email address around. And then you got pictures, didn't you? And you actually got the catalogue, didn't you, Tony?
I still got the catalogue, which is apparently worth something now.
I'll take some pictures and put them up. Somehow we'll get that out there, because they were the Disneyland brochure is, John, you'd love to see it. It was fascinating. What Tony, I never went, and luckily Tony got to go down there. It was incredible, wasn't it?
The bit that most sticks in my mind, there was a tent where you had to queue up before you got in, and it was all political posters and banners. And the girl who was waiting outside, without even making eye contact with me and my friend who went, just said, "Do you like political banners? If you like political banners, you'll probably like this. You can go in now." And just that really kind of flat monotone was just so alien to, every time you walk into a shop or every time you avail yourself. And I just love that about it. The only thing I can liken it to is Anthony Gormley's Another Place on Crosby Beach, where it's kind of art in the community, and it was very much that. You were kind of interacting with everything. You could touch everything.
Right. Okay.
It was incredible.
Could touch stuff, and you
could touch loads of stuff. Yeah, they were kind of encouraging you to sort of kick stuff around and press buttons and all sorts of. Not on all of the exhibits, but on some of them. Yeah.
It was a shame. It was just 6 weeks, and that it just wasn't. Because I think he has such an impact on people's conscious, political thoughts. And just sort of
it's that core mission, if you like, that he's got to democratise art. It doesn't belong to some elite.
Yes,
it actually belongs to people, and to use art or to see it, the purpose of it is to shine a light on the restrictions that are placed on the general populace to behave in certain ways.
Yeah.
Almost like the role playing that you have in society. We play roles according to rules, and who determines those rules? And so he plays with that, in my view.
Yeah.
Read Irving Goffman, The Role of the Self in Everyday Life.
Oh, right, okay.
He's recommended psychology text when you're an undergraduate, and it talks about the roles we play, the behaviour we do, because it's expected, and it links in with lots of other things about, within organisations, the patterns of behaviour and hierarchies that exist. They're not natural; they're constructed.
Okay, that's.
I was just going to come back on what you said about the democratisation of art, because the reason I kind of linked it to Anthony Gormley's Another Place, when he was first building that on Crosby Beach, people said, "But people are going to come along and graffiti it," are they going to put Liverpool and Everton shirts on your fingers and all this type of thing? And he said, absolutely, that's exactly what I want people to do. Now, if I went in the Louvre Gallery and threw a load of paint or eggs or something on the Mona Lisa, A, I'd probably be public enemy number one in Paris and all around the world, and B, I'd probably end up going to prison, because it would be considered so heavy. Yeah. If somebody graffitis a piece of Banksy art, my guess is that Banksy would say, well done, that's an artistic statement in itself.
No.
What was it, the two people who exhibited a toilet in an art gallery and some Japanese performance artist came and had a wee in it or a poo in it, and it was, again, he got in trouble for doing that. But that's an artistic statement in itself, isn't it? And I think that's why Banksy is an urban community artist rather than an artist who wants his stuff in art galleries. He's actually quite happy for people to interact with it. Yeah. And if you come and, I don't know, maybe not a Nazi swastika, but if you come and put noughts and crosses on it or draw a red nose on somebody, I think, we don't know who he is doing, but somewhere he would be applauding that.
Well, there's the Damien Hirst story, isn't it? The artist that had a table of, it was just tin cans and rubbish, and it was worth £10,000, and the cleaner came in at night and just thought it was a dirty table and cleaned it up. And is that art in itself that that cleaner has then added to the piece or taken away? Anyway, we must mention, of course, there was a film about Banksy called Exit Through the Gift Shop. Have you seen that, John?
No.
So it's well worth, and so anybody out there, watch it. It's fascinating. I'm still not sure whether it was. It's done as a documentary film, and you start off with this first French graffiti artist character, and then it sort of goes into other. And I don't know whether that's like a Spinal Tap. It's all put on. Anyway, that's for people to go away and make their own judgment. But it's very interesting because it does sort of look at his. The way he sort of works, and then you've got this other sort of parallel with this story of a French graffiti artist. Tony, you've seen it.
I have. I don't remember much of the detail apart from the bit we said about Guantanamo, but I think what's fascinating about it, it's extremely possible that Banksy had absolutely nothing to do with that film, but that two filmmakers have just... But if that was... I mean, for example, I read a book called In Search of J.D. Salinger, and J.D. Salinger, who wrote The Catcher in the Rye, kind of became a recluse straight after, and somebody tried to write a biography of him without his permission, and he sued them and did everything he could to stop this biography being published. So the In Search of J.D. Salinger is more like a detective story than a biography. And if I was doing a film about, I don't know, David Hockney or something without any authorisation, he would sue me and stop me from doing it. Or if I released the film, he would want a great big chunk of the royalties. Banksy's not going to do that because Banksy's invisible. So whether Banksy actually sanctioned that film and had something to do with it, or whether it was absolutely nothing to do with him, in a funny sort of way, doesn't even matter. And he's kind of created that persona for himself, isn't it? Because he doesn't want to break cover, because he wants to be invisible. Then anybody could make a film and say it was a Banksy film, and he probably wouldn't bother coming out the woodwork to dispute it.
I think I like and the parallel for me, the parallel of philosophies. So that his philosophy with his art, some of his art, I think the Dismal Land is different in a way, but the philosophy of his art is over to you.
Yeah.
You think about it, and in a way, the way he operates as a person, it's almost like my life and all this kind of wanting to know about me. You should be wanting to know about yourselves, and what your predicament is. Not about me. I'm just a guy who does some paintings.
Yeah,
I'm not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is yourself.
Yeah.
And making decisions for yourself and being empowered by yourself, not being distracted by the circus of showmanship that often accompanies art, which is like you're alluding to almost like a David Hockney thing is, look at me, I'm this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he would subscribe to that, but that's the picture I'm getting. I don't know if he's like that, but Banksy doesn't want the look at me.
Yeah.
He wants look at yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that adds it. There's a power in that for him, and maybe that it would be interesting to look at, say, religious art from the 14th century, which would be more. This is the Bible story. Do this. Although I bet there's loads of subtext within it, like I've said. But he's not saying that. He's saying, look, you need to start making decisions for yourself, because if you don't, someone else will make them for you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's brilliant. John, thank you. Is there any other thoughts you've got on Banksy, or will I take that as your final thoughts on this.
That's good. That's good.
That was brilliant. That was absolutely excellent, Tony.
I was only just going to react to what John just said. I agree 100% with everything you said, but I actually think Dismal Land was that. When you said Dismal Land might be the exception, I think what you were saying with Dismal Land, that if you ever see a 1-star review of a hotel on TripAdvisor or Hotels.com, it's always an American tourists who expected them to roll out the red carpet and have a champagne reception for them, because American tourists tend to feel that way. And I actually think what he was saying with Dismal Land is, this is more typical of the way we talk to each other. This is more typical of the way we communicate day to day. The other aspects of it is all kind of putting on a show, the showmanship that you described. So I absolutely agree that's what Banksy's all about. But I also think that's what...
So to use a hackneyed phrase, he's talking about authenticity.
Well,
about people being authentic instead of...
Well, the other location... Sorry, John. The other location I would recommend to people, if you do go to Bristol, find a place called the Bear Pit. And it's basically it's an old skateboard park, but they basically, I think people do still skateboard there, but they opened it to urban artists. There are some original Banksys there, but there's loads of other artists as well. There's a double-decker London bus where you can get a cup of tea on it. And again, it's the same sort of thing. It's part of the community. It's not an art gallery. There is an art gallery in Bristol where you can see a couple of Banksys, but if you go to the Bear Pit, you'll see a dozen Banksys and 100 other really gifted urban artists as well. And it's out in the community. You don't have to pay to get in. You just wander down. And
I was going to say, it's free.
It's absolutely. It's just it's literally urban art. So it's just people have painted on the walls of a particular part of the community. And again, it's this. It's not just the fact that it's free; it's the fact that it's independent and nobody's controlling what goes in and what doesn't go in. Anybody can just turn up with a paintbrush and a few stencils, and you can do whatever you want. And I think that's where he's maybe a really valued member of our artistic community, whoever he is.
Wonderful, yes,
absolutely.
Well, to finish on that, yes. It is looking on it's saying that it's, I did find out who he was, and it's, apparently, this is according to Google search, Banksy is believed to be Robin Gunningham, born on the 28th of July 1973, 12 miles from Bristol in Yate.
Right.
Whether that is true or not, it probably is. Who knows?
Also, I don't think it's true to say that everything we think is a Banksy painted by that individual that you just named. I think it's almost become a cottage industry
now.
If
you go to acronym or whatever.com and put in Robin Gunningham, I bet a few other words come out. He's playing with us right now. So, but anyway, listen, that was T-POW. That was the psychology of whatever. Thank you to John Woods. Thank you, John. And
welcome.
And to Tony Kinsella.
That's not my real name. I'm really Banksy.
Yeah, that's not. And to me, Jeff Downs. This has been the psychology of whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you.